Welcome to my ramblings on The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings box set. So I got this box set I don't know 6 months ago, a few months ago at the local bookstore, and it's interesting. Sorry, let me see if I can. It's interesting that I swear these books all fit in at one time. Now look. Now look. There's very difficult to squeeze these books back into the box set. I think just the act of reading these books and cracking that binding must make them expand. Because I mean, when I was reading the first book, The Hobbit, I could tell that the book was getting a little bit less compact, but I could still squeeze them in. But after a couple books, this box is pretty worthless. I mean, it's a pretty flimsy box, anyways. My daughter has. Actually, it's holding together now. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, and she's right at the age where she loves to put things in the box and take things out of the box. And she had so much fun with this, and I kept saying, no, those are Daddy's books. Daddy's books, don't touch. But she kept saying, I want to put the books in the box. And then inevitably, this book got ripped. Fortunately, these are not part of my permanent collection. As far as I'm concerned, once I've read the books, I'm done with them. But anyways, yeah, the box set. So let me just talk about what I want to do in this video. When you have a box set like this, or several books in one volume, there's always a question about, do you review them separately or do you review them together? And after going back and forth on this a few times over the years, both on my weblog and on this channel, I decided, why not both? So I have reviewed all of these books separately. I'll link to my various reviews down below. And then something I've decided I'm going to start doing on this channel is just one wrap-up review of the whole thing. Now, I don't really have much intelligent to say about this that I haven't already said before. Consider yourself forewarned, but I'm going to ramble anyways and talk about some of this. So I had a started video for this project, which again I'll link to down below, in which I gave my history with this. I grew up on the Rankin Bass movies, those old animated movies from the late 70s, early 80s, which had The Hobbit, and The Return of the King. And if you've seen those movies, you know it somewhat bridges the gap between them by briefly covering what some of the stuff that happened in book one. And like everybody else, I saw the Peter Jackson movies. So like everyone else, I was familiar with this before starting it. I also, as I mentioned in the previous videos, in my youth, did read The Hobbit and tried to get through the trilogy, but gave up. So now I have completely read the whole thing. I've been feeling guilty for 20 years for not having finished this trilogy, and rightly so. I mean, you can't be on BookTube and not have finished this trilogy, right? This is one of those prerequisites. But I've got it now. Finally finished. So, right. What are some comments to make about this? As has been pointed out by everyone, the tone is different between The Hobbits and The Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit was originally published as a children's book sometime in the 1930s. Lord of the Rings was published as an adult epic fantasy in the 1950s, some 20 years later. Steve Donahue, in one of his videos, I don't remember which video, he publishes 5 videos a day, said that in his opinion, the tonal shift doesn't happen until about 100 pages in to the first book. So the first book is still the lighter tone of The Hobbit, or the children's story tone of The Hobbit. I'm not sure I agree with that completely, although one disagrees with Steve Donahue at their own risk. I think the tendency towards longer descriptions and a more demanding attention span starts really from page 1 of this book. But what I did definitely notice is, sorry, Steve Donahue doesn't say the first 100 pages. Steve Donahue says up until Rivendell. Up until Rivendell. I remember now. Which is, well, where is the Rivendell part? It's like halfway through the book. So yeah, like I said, I don't agree with that completely. But what I do definitely notice, I think, is the whole section up until Rivendell is very closely tied to The Hobbit. Everything is linking back to references made in The Hobbit, characters from The Hobbit, events from The Hobbit. So, for example, they're traveling through the same parts that Bilbo Baggins had traveled through. They find the trolls that had gotten turned to stone in The Hobbit, and they comment on that. It's just very, very closely connected with the events in The Hobbit. For that reason, among other reasons, I think it's somewhat erroneous to refer to this as a trilogy, because you couldn't possibly pick up this book without having read The Hobbit first, right? Well, although I know that's how Peter Jackson did the movies. Oh, okay, fair enough. With maybe some support, you could jump in without having read The Hobbit first. But really, it's a quartet, isn't it? The trilogy is somewhat misleading, isn't it? But yeah. So the tone is different. Also, in these editions, I don't know if this is going to show up on the camera, but the size of the font is different. Does this show up on camera? You can see The Hobbit has much larger font, and the Lord of the Rings book has much smaller font. So not only is The Hobbit much smaller in terms of, the smallest book in the set, but yeah, the font is much bigger. The Hobbit, I remember when I first read through it, finding it a bit of a slog. And no doubt this was because I already knew the story from the movie. So I felt like I was just getting a lot of boring description and wasn't getting anything new. Returning back to it, I enjoyed it much more. I enjoyed the atmosphere of the book much more on the second reading. My second reading meaning the one I just did this past year. I did find some of the landscape descriptions a little bit hard to process and somewhat tiring, but it feels silly to complain about that because I had no idea what was coming in The Lord of the Rings. So many long descriptions of the landscape. It occurred to me, see, I had gotten the impression over the years, reading stuff off of Wikipedia and stuff like that, that Tolkien's world building and his blending of Anglo-Saxon mythology with maybe a modern, the storytelling of a modern novel was responsible for creating the modern fantasy genre. I think that's largely true, isn't it? Again, Steve Donahue will talk about some of Tolkien's predecessors, like Lord Durnsley or something like that, the Elf King's daughter. I've not read them. I just recognize these names from Steve Donahue. But yeah, sorry. Anyways, I think I had gotten the impression that the appeal of Tolkien was in the world building and the lore. But reading through these books, you get the impression that Tolkien's preoccupation is the landscapes. So he's obviously got these expansive landscapes, forests and rivers and mountains and dells and swamps, perfectly in his head, I must imagine. And he spends a lot of time trying to get them down on paper. I don't know anything about publishing, but I strongly suspect that this would not be tolerated by an editor nowadays. This would be cut out completely. I have a friend, actually. Sorry, this is another digression. Who is studying literature in graduate school, and she was telling me that there was a shift over the years that coincided with the birth of cinema. You know, the technology required to make movies and the introduction of movies in the 20th century. There was a shift in literary descriptions. So before movies, authors felt obliged to describe the landscape or the room, the scenery a lot more. After movies became popular, it was assumed that the readers would be able to visualize these kind of things with a lot less heavy description, and that a lot less description was necessary to evoke the necessary images. I'm not sure if that's true. I'm just repeating stuff that somebody told me, but I wonder. I think if that's true, these books written in the 1950s when cinema was still in its infancy, certainly when television was in its infancy, seemed to be before that shift. There's a lot of descriptions that I don't think a modern editor would tolerate. So yes, I struggled with the long descriptions, as I think a lot of Tolkien's readers do. I struggled both in terms of my patience with them, and also struggled to visualize what Tolkien wanted me to visualize. I thought that the vocabulary, his landscape descriptions, didn't always understand what everything was. Sometimes had just, I don't know. I don't know how much of that is just me. I think somewhat of that, I think that's true of a number of readers, huh? The third book has 6 appendices. Appendix A, B, C, D, E, and F, which actually makes up, including the appendices in the index, makes up a fair chunk, this third book. It's contained in the last volume, but it's the appendices for the whole trilogy. It includes some excessive world building, like 10 pages explaining the Hobbit calendar, which I didn't need, could have been happy without, in Appendix D. But Appendix A and B, giving the history of Middle Earth and the history of the kingdom, right? Because Aragon is the heir, the return of the king is Aragon coming back to claim the kingship again. Everybody knows this from the movies. The whole history of that kingdom that he's reclaiming is given in these appendices, as well as the history of Middle Earth. It's fascinating reading, but it made me realize how much of Tolkien's world building is in the appendices and not in the main text. Whereas in the main text, the predominant thing seems to be a lot of descriptions of the landscapes. But of course, the landscapes are equally important. I mean, when you think of Tolkien fans, I think maybe especially when you think of Tolkien fans in the 70s and 80s, right? You think of those beautiful landscape pictures, which used to predominate in bookstores and hippie stores, and maybe still do. I don't know. I'm a little bit out of touch because I've been abroad for so long. Although I think some of that has moved over to the internet now. But you used to see that stuff in bookstores and hippie stores all the time, right? Those posters of people drawing what they imagined from Tolkien's books. So yeah, I guess the landscapes are an important part of it. I was expecting the world building to be more, and was a bit surprised that so much of it was relegated to the appendices, where we don't really get the history of the kingdom until that. The edition I have here has the page numbers continuous over the whole trilogy. So this volume 1 ends with page 531, and then volume 2 starts off with the first page being in the 530s. Like a lot of books, it's a little bit hard to tell where the page numbers begin. I guess it begins from the title page. So the first number we see here is 538, but you know what I mean. Page numbers are continuous over these three books. It's not true with The Hobbit. The Hobbit is set off by itself. But that's to emphasize what the publishers make clear in their introduction, is that apparently Tolkien viewed this as just all one book that needed to be split up into 3 volumes just for publishing reasons, bookbinding reasons. And I think there are editions of this now which put them all into one huge hardcover book, right? I've seen some of those on BookTube. And so then the appendices are supposed to be the appendices for the whole trilogy, even though they're put into the third book here. Sorry, lost my train of thought. What else did I want to talk about? The other thing with the appendices, they reference page numbers throughout the text, where you can cross-reference some of the information in the appendices where it's alluded to in the text, including The Hobbit. So let's see. Does this show up on the camera? This is referencing The Hobbit, page 22. Sorry, I think that's out of focus. But then when I double checked that with The Hobbit, the page numbers did not align with the appendices from The Lord of the Rings. So I wonder if maybe when they were putting this box set together, they didn't put in the right edition of The Hobbit. This is, by the way, you can see here, this is this particular box set ties in with the movies, which I got this just because this was the only one at my bookstore. I suppose this is quite common. I actually did not want something that tied in with the movies because I was doing my best to forget about the movies when I read these books. It's a scene from the movies, although it's, to be fair, the actors' faces aren't really in your face here. It's more of a, yeah. Same with this one. I think this is inspired by the movies, but at least you don't see the actors' faces. I was trying my best to absorb the books on their own terms, as if the movies didn't exist. But of course, that's always hard to do after you've seen the movies. Yeah, I'm glad I finally finished these. Admittedly, I should have read them a long time ago. I knew people in high school who were obsessed with Tolkien. I'm sure you did too. That was those people were in every high school who not only had read the books but had absorbed the lore, the mythology, the languages, and to a certain extent, I can dig that. I like absorbing myself in fantasy as well. You know, I was a big Star Trek fan, a big comic book fan when I was younger. Absorbing yourself in that extended continuity. I found it sometimes a little bit hard to process exactly all the details of Tolkien's continuity, and certainly by the time I got to the appendices, if there's something I didn't completely understand, I just kept reading. I didn't want to waste too much time puzzling over the appendices. But it does occur to me now that I've finally read these books that it might be kind of fun to try and get into the whole thing. You know, read the Silmarillion, read some of those other books that have what are they called? The Children of Huron, or what's the other one called? Some of those other books that have been released after Tolkien's death. Unfortunately for me, I'm living out here in Vietnam, and I've already searched the online catalogs of the local bookstores that supply English books, and I can't find them. So I'm going to have to stop here, but maybe revisit it someday. I don't know. There are so many bookish people who have read this trilogy, these books multiple times, that I'm thinking maybe I'll revisit them someday. I'm of course I'm having just now finished them. I'm getting a start a little bit later in life, but maybe it would be fun to someday, if I'm back in the U.S., get my hands on the Silmarillion and those other Middle Earth books, revisit these, maybe even have a go at the elf languages and trying to understand some of the stuff that's in the back about the written language and the elf language. I think Tolkien's elf language is on Duolingo. I guess if I really wanted to get into it, that's what I would do. And it's a silly idea. I'm sure I don't have the time to do it, but well, who knows? It might be fun to think about one day. But yeah, for now, I am all set with this box set, and I can let my daughter have fun trying to take the books in and out of the box.